You've got News Munchies with Ted Corliss, and I love to produce a cannabis-positive message in the universe. Not necessarily positive in the sense that I'd like you to smoke more of it, but instead give you an opportunity to have an intelligent conversation with others about the reformation, medicalization, and ultimate legalization of marijuana. Reach out to us at www.newsmunchies.com. A few weeks ago, I reached out to declare 2020 the year of indica. Why would that be? Why would it need to be the year of the indica? Well, unless you've been sleeping under a rock for a while, you should know that 2020 is going to be an election season. And if there's ever been a year where we all need to mellow out, and that's truly what the indica is for, it's going to be 2020. Today's topic is looking at the candidates who appear to be heading to that 2020 November ballot and addressing the issue that we focus on, which is, of course, the legalization, reformation, and medicalization of cannabis laws in America. We have so many amazing things going on in the progressive direction of legalization and decriminalization of cannabis. But we have new candidates coming in, and we need to understand which each one of these candidates is going to do if they're given the keys to the Oval Office. And of course, we need to begin with that, focusing on the current occupant, the Emperor Donald Trump. And I'm sorry, I'm going to have to call him the Emperor Trump, because apparently the balance of power, the shared power that's in the separation of power within our beloved Constitution means less and less to Emperor Trump than most others. But I'm going to let his words speak for themselves, and then we're going to talk about the two candidates that fared well in the Iowa caucus that just occurred a few weeks ago, with a couple of bubbles popping after in the manner in which they're counting their ballots or dealing with how they caucus. Can you caucus? Can you say caucus on the radio? I don't know, but I think they had an Iowa caucus, and because of that, there was a lot of confusion. The whole process is pretty wild. But let's get back to the original issue before we talk about Mayor Pete and, of course, Bernie Sanders, who, as of yesterday, also appears to have won the Democratic primary in New Hampshire. But let's first address Mr. Trump. Now, if we look back to October of 2013, we would find a memorandum that came from the Department of Justice, specifically the then Attorney General issued a memorandum to the United States attorneys directing them not to use public funds to proceed against cannabis interests in states where the states have voted it legal. That's Eric Holder sent that memorandum dated October of 2013. Now, if we fast forward to the then Attorney General Jeff Sessions under the Trump administration, one of the very first things he did was to issue a counter memorandum saying that no, cannabis is illegal under federal law, and the individual U.S. attorneys do not have the authority to decide which laws to enforce and which not to enforce. Well, that was something that was obviously a major step back for people like me who are promoting legalization of cannabis. But what else has the Trump administration done other than that? Well, if we go back in time again, let's go back this time to the memorandum that was issued as an attachment to one of the bills that funded the government. And that particular bill created protections for the state programs. Specifically, it's the Rohrbacher Bloomin Amendment, and that's a whole bunch of vowels and consonants. So I'm going to say that again, Rohrbacher Bloomin Amendment. And what that said was that it approved the money to keep the federal government alive and working, but it precluded the use of federal funds to seek enforcement of federal law against marijuana sales in states where they had either passed a legislative initiative like Illinois did, or if you have some form of constitutional amendment like Missouri did. in this particular situation, it meant that anyone who was wanting to go to the federal government for resources so they could attempt to shut down medical marijuana in a state where it's legal, that was a no bueno. You're not going to get access to those resources. And so we have this nice little moat built around medical cannabis. Well, now it's starting to look like one of the final episodes of Game of Thrones, where the zombies are getting inside the perimeter. Now, Mr. Trump, like most issues, is all over the place. And whether you want to believe one of his stories over the other, that's on you. But let's specifically address whether or not he is. What have you done for us lately, Mr. Trump? Yes, you've talked at years and years about the failed war on drugs. You've also made a lot of anti-civil libertarian comments, especially about people of color. But where are you today in 2020? Well, if we take a look at his most recent budget, which is many times an expression of a politician's priorities, and according to his priorities, he wants to go back to fighting the war on drugs. In fact, in the memoranda associated with his most recent proposals for budgets, he specifically increases the amount of money that would be used to fight the, quote, war on drugs that was started by the Nixon administration in the early part of the 70s. He also is looking at opportunities to turn drug sales into a crime for which the death penalty could be offered. Wow, let that soak in for just a moment. The death penalty would not appear to be, in my opinion, a progressive approach to the current war on drugs, quite reactive as opposed to progressive. And therefore, if we happen to be the subject of a second administration with Mr. Trump, the data so far appears to suggest that he's more interested in introducing research to Big Pharma so that Big Pharma can study how it should resolve its opioid problem. So isn't that a little bit like a private equity guy going to a drug dealer and telling him he's going to give him money so that he can figure out how to stop selling drugs or to start selling them in a better way? I think the point here is that we can say with absolute certainty that the Trump administration versus any of the candidates is likely not going to be someone that we will fare well in the legalization or reformation category. But what about the other candidates? Where are they coming in? The other two candidates that appeared to do well in the Iowa caucus were, of course, Mayor Pete, who is the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, as well as Bernie Sanders, who, being well supported by the Millennials Plus, his statement is obviously the most progressive and the most liberal. He states specifically that if Bernie Sanders is president, on his first day, he will legalize marijuana with an executive order. Now, can he do that? He probably can, and especially if he is, in fact, the head of the executive branch. And guess who works for the executive branch? The FDA. So does the DEA. So does the DOJ. All of the AAAs. Here we come. The President of the United States controls these individual entities, much like the current president appears to be in control of the Department of Justice, deciding which one of his friends are going to be charged and how much, based upon his own interests rather than the interests of the law itself. So if Bernie Sanders comes in and decides he's going to legalize cannabis, I think he can probably push that pretty far. And would he do that? I find nothing in the record. I'd love to hear your perspective if you want to reach out to us at News Munchies. If you have something that tells me that Bernie Sanders is not being straight with us when he says he will legalize cannabis on the very first day. Virtually everything he says after that is consistent with that approach. Now, let's turn for just a second here to Mayor Pete. What about Mayor Pete? Now, Mayor Pete is getting a lot of heat these days. I saw a statistic recently that said that in South Bend, Indiana, the likelihood of being arrested for a cannabis charge is 4 times more likely in South Bend, Indiana, if you happen to be a person of color. Let me put that statistic in context. That's the number in America, folks. That's not a South Bend, Indiana issue. And the mayor of a city has very limited ability to control how law enforcement enforces the law. I don't see how, unless there was some form of big initiative or did he run on it as a political mandate, that Mayor Pete can be accused of calling people out for the use of cannabis. He provides in his answers to these questions the idea that this needs to happen, that we need to legalize cannabis and we need to decide how to do that in a responsible and progressive manner without continuing to either put people in jail or, according to Mr. Trump, even execute them under certain circumstances. And so we've got really a nice clean break here between the so-called conservatives, this particular one, because remember, conservatives love fiscal conservatism. They love not spending money unless it's on the things they want. And let's be honest, if you have a strong relationship as a leader with the petroleum industry, where does that put you juxtaposed to the cannabis question? Most of the candidates, other than the current occupant of the White House, believe that we need to move away from fossil fuels and other petroleum products and more into renewables. In the context of the oil that can be made from hemp, that can substitute for all that nasty oil that the petroleum industry wants to put in all of your products. There is nothing you make with petroleum oil you can't make with hemp oil. And let's also acknowledge that hemp oil certainly does not have the environmental impacts associated with drilling in the Arctic National Forest. And so I have some difficulty accepting any candidate who accepts so much money from the petroleum industry that they are going to do anything to cut their market share anywhere in the market itself. The remainder of these candidates, most of them are very much against the petroleum industry, and this is a nice little break for you. If you're one of those people who hasn't made a decision about the current occupant juxtaposed to others, I think the issue of medical marijuana or even recreational marijuana, even more so, is going to be significant moving forward. And you might miss an opportunity to eliminate the criminalization of cannabis if you continue to support the current candidate. This issue is pretty clear. All right, so let's summarize. We're going to continue to monitor the success of these individual candidates, and we're going to be paying especially close attention here at News Munchies with how it is they're going to deal with this, because so much of what is happening right now is happening very fast, and we're going to be in the summer before we know it, and there's going to be a Democratic National Convention where we're going to hear specifically about the issue of medical marijuana. That in and of itself will be progressive, and I'm going to tell you why, and I'm going to end with this. In the election that we went through in 2016, of all of the debates that took place between the candidates who were running for office, as well as in the general election between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, in all of those debates, if you counted every time someone asked about medical marijuana or marijuana at all, the total number, if you count, let me see, 1, 2, 3, was 0, because they never asked them about it, because it didn't matter to them at the time. Well, now we literally have billions of dollars worth of this plant being sold. We have medicine being generated that is providing help and support to so many people, young children, older people, people facing cancer diagnoses, things like that. And instead, what we have is an opportunity to move away from where we are and develop a solution that's going to make sense for all of us. My name is Ted Corliss. You've got Ted Corliss on News Munchies. Keep an eye on the politics, folks, and most importantly, I need you to vote. Late at night, when you get the munchies, go to www.newsmunchies.com. This is Ted Corliss. Be well.